if you are watching this, and I'm purposefully making this video to talk to you guys for a minute and see what hopefully everybody's going good, doing good today. Hopefully everything is all right for you this beautiful Sunday that God created for us. So, what did we speak about? Well, um, how do I want to start this off? First of all, I want to say that my heart goes out to all the people out here who day by day have to put up against these this corrupted administration. And if you guys feel like you're by yourself, remember the revolution will not be televised, right? Remember that there's been protests all around the nation, and people are not giving up, and they're not giving in. As Americans, we have ever more right to stand up against tyranny, even within our own government, right? So, yeah. So, I also want to say that, people might be sad for a lot of different reasons. And obviously, pretty much some of these things might be agitated because of the current climate, because of the same, government climate that we're in. So, just gonna talk my points a little bit, argue about some stuff, that I see. For example, today, I guess the topic we can talk about is, you know, um, well, or I can prove to you guys maybe something a better topic. But we could talk about God or politics or whatever. I know people don't like to talk about those things, but I would say this: hold your peace, and I think that's what we need to have is our peace. Um, how will we defeat this tyrannical movement, this racism and stuff? Because every day, we are getting desensitized and by these things. So how do we fortify ourselves against this, and sanctify ourselves and not get desensitized? Well, one of the things we can do is to pray to God for Him to do it, to repent. And I feel as though that what we need to do is repent, and like and I want to remind you guys of something that Jesus said, because I see this talking point a lot within certain groups, about what God says, right? Which is that I see this talking point a lot from the MAGA supporters and stuff. You know what I mean? And I've seen some people debate it from the left, such as like these the the ones that they labeled white kids for Biden or something like that. I forgot what it's for white boys or something. I forgot what they're called. It's these those dudes on TikTok, and you know what I see now is that like a lot of people used to try to use the Bible to defend their political arguments, and so what I mean. I'll have you know, right, that cherry picking out of the Bible is one of the most, you know, is one of the worst things you can do. You know what I mean? And there's just so much things that the reason I say is because weaponizing Christianity is something that is like, just it just goes against the whole premise of what God was trying to tell us, which was, to have an open heart, to love thy neighbor, to help one another, right? And so when you weaponize Christianity against a group of people, you're alienating them a bit further from the truth, right? And maybe they can even be closer to the truth than you can, because there's so much evidence that in the Bible that says if first of all, if you are supposedly a Christian and you think that you need to be deporting migrants, then you have failed. You know what I mean? You are a bad example, and Christianity has failed you. Well, it hasn't failed you. It doesn't fail anybody. But let's just be real. You do not want to listen to God. You know what I mean? And that's worse, than people who have never heard of God, but yet are open to agreeing. So let me get this. Let me get this clear. Let me be clear. I am definitely pro immigration, and migrants are my family, right? Like any migrant is my family because we're all brothers and sisters in the Christ. Not and I mean spiritually, right? Obviously. I mean, spiritually, and this is the way that God wanted us to believe, to behave. And even the indigenous people had more, who called the white man to be brothers, were rejected by the white man, the colonizers, the invaders, the true aliens, if you want to call them that. You know what I mean? Were the Europeans that came over here on ships and said, you know what I mean, let me buy the land. And then the indigenous were like, no, how about we be brothers instead and we share this land? And he's like, no, how about we just make a deal? And we're not brothers. You are subservient to us. And then the indigenous were like, you be our brothers or we're not going to be anything at all. You know what I mean? And then that's where the beef started, right? You know what I mean? So even the indigenous had, for example, had more um, knowledge of God, right? In the sense that they followed the golden rule. They were able to look at other human beings as sons and daughters of God. They were able to look at them as their spiritual brothers and sisters. You know what I mean? And they were able to help them, help thy neighbor, the sojourner on the land, help them fish, help them brave the cold winters, help them find out where the buffalo are going, how to hunt, how to do agriculture, you know what I mean? And which is, all these other things, and it taught them how to survive, basically, and this is, something that God teaches us, in the Old Testament, which is to, be kind and help the sojourner or the stranger in your land, right? A lot of people will say, when God comes and he on Judgment Day and gives account to, wants you to give account to as a testimony, there's he's gonna be like, did you help me? Thank you for feeding me. Thank you for clothing me. Thank you for helping me when I was sick. Thank you for visiting me in jail. Thank you for, taking me in when I was homeless. Thank you for being nice to me when I was a stranger in your land. And they're gonna be like, sir, when did we do any of this? And he's like, you know, if you did this to the least of us, you did it to me, right? Because we're all brothers and sisters spiritually, right? And so that's why I say that migrants are my family, right? And as an American, right, and born here, and just to be fair, I have more, according to the Constitution, I have more chances of running for president than Elon Musk, because Elon Musk is not even from here, so he can't even be president of the United States, and I can, according to the Constitution, according to the law, right? Just to put things in perspective, right? And that I am pro immigration. I do believe in integration. I believe that as Christians, this is the right thing. And also, as Christians, if you want to call yourself a Christian nation, then it's not, the last thing you want to be is isolationist and xenophobic and racist, right? And greedy and materialistic, and these are all things that people want to pick and choose, right? But let me tell you that if you were truly a Christian, there would be no poor, homeless people. Okay, how can you call yourself a Christian, right? But then not want to help the black demographics or the brown demographic here in the United States? Because Jesus told you straight up that you have to help the poor, right? That is not a debate. That is not a talking. That is not a inference. Okay, that's his words, right? His direct words. That's not Paul that said it. That wasn't anybody else. That was Jesus Christ that said that, right? So, so why don't people do it, right? This is, and they call themselves Christians, but they don't do this. But if they're not doing this stuff that Christ says, then how can they call themselves Christians, right? So people want to pick and choose, and people want to worship a false image of God, one that they say they're Christ, they say they're Christians, but then they want to kick out, poor people or migrants, or they want to lock up innocent people, or they want to demonize people, they want to have hatred and revenge against people, you know what I mean? And or they want to be materialistic and greedy. Okay, that is not the real image of God. That is not the real image of God, nor is that the real image of Jesus Christ or the teachings of Christ. So these people that believe in deporting migrants are not Christians. I don't care what you say. I don't care. Oh, but God tells you to obey the law. No, Paul said that, right? When Jesus said to submit, right, to authority, whose law are we talking about? Man-made laws or God's laws, right? They're two different things. Do you think God care if he were to come here now? Do you think he cares about the laws of America, or do you think he cares about God's laws? No. You know what he would say? He said, God's. He says America is corrupted. Its law system doesn't work. It could because it condemns innocent people. He'll say, run away from this country. You know what I mean? Just like when you look in Revelations, you say, woe to the daughter of Babylon. Woe to those that didn't hear. He would say, flee. He would say, give that which is Caesar's back to Caesar. Get away from this nation, etc. I mean, right? If any nation was like this, and why do I say that? Because when you are able to deport, you know, 4-year-olds or 2-year-olds, and you're able to incarcerate them and put them in a courtroom without nobody helping them, right? And migrant kids, and you think that's okay? Then that's a failure of the system. There's no way that if things were done correctly that would ever happen, right? But things weren't done correctly, and yet these people that want to do this want to act like they're Christians, and they're not Christians. That's an injustice, right? Same thing with you know many sort of condemning people, condemning those the all of migrants terrorists. That's one of the worst things that you can do. That is because they want to get rid of Salvadorians. They want to put in your mind that all those MS-13 members are terrorists, or that every single middle-aged man that's from Salvadorian that's a migrant is a terrorist or a rapist. When y'all voted for a rapist, y'all voted for a sex trafficker, y'all voted for a felon, y'all voted for a man who has caused more damage to the United States than any terrorist could freaking dream of having caused. I mean, because a terrorist couldn't tank $5 trillion off the markets in one day, right? Instead of expanding the market, he's trying to consolidate the power for the rich. You know what I mean? A terrorist couldn't dream of dividing this nation as far as it's gone. As guys is gotten. A terrorist couldn't dream of stomping over the Constitution and then cutting our governmental apparatus, and minimizing and shutting down all those departments. They couldn't dream of doing something like that to this country, right? They couldn't dream of, taking $5 trillion off the markets. You know what I mean? Yet they couldn't dream of killing 500,000 Americans and getting away with it. But that's what Trump has done, all on his watch. 450,000 Americans have died under his watch. $5 trillion have escaped, have been liquidated out of the markets, right? $9 trillion has been consolidated to the top 1 or 10% of people in this country. Okay, greatest injustice and one man himself has been able to totally stomp over the Constitution, right? Which is protected, even by even against a nuclear fallout, but yet it still is being desecrated by Donald Trump. Still finding a way to manage to just wants to throw it out all. No president should ever be going against their oath and affirmation is to protect the Constitution, not to ever bring a discussion about getting rid of it. Okay, but like everything, he is a horrible president, only working for materialistic purposes for the rich, right? With no sense and no empathy and no sympathy towards poor or the average man, the average citizen, right? That makes less than 225,000 a year, right? And and this is such an injustice. It's almost cruel that what we're seeing here is cruel, right? And it's because those rich people are not sympathetic towards the rest of us, right? I know it's a shock for you to believe that the rich people don't like you, but anyway, for me it's not because they worship money, they don't worship God, and they don't know love, and they don't know empathy. It's not a surprise that people that are make their whole life about money to be to be inhumane, to be unempathetic. You know what I mean? Because money is tangible. Money is not a real living, breathing being. It's not a God. It's not a real breathing God. It is a dead picture. You know what I mean? It's worth its fiat currency. It doesn't even have any inherent value. You know what I mean? But yet, it's what people can do with it, right? It's the materialism of what you can do with it, and that's what people worship, right? At the expense of people's rights, sovereignty, and just humanity, right? So anyway, we're acting like like this country is not big enough for many people. This country is big enough to have all of Americans and Mexicans inside of here, and we still have more land per person than people in India, or people in China. You know what I mean? Like you understand what I'm saying? Like, because there's only 350 million or 330 or 40 million Americans, right? The baby boomer generation, it makes up for a lot of them. They're gonna pass on. You know what I mean? I don't think that y'all understand about shit. Y'all don't understand certain things. Like in Mexico, there's only 140 million people, and both of our countries are lacking of a workforce. You understand what I'm saying? So we're already dwindling on because the baby boomer was one of the biggest generations. They're about to be gone, right? They're about to be retiring. Who's gonna do our workforce? You understand what I'm saying? What you guys want to be doing is to be replaced by robots, so that the corporations don't have to downsize by hiring more workers. And then you want them to be replaced by robots, so that they don't have a need for you. So they stay becoming the mega corporations while you guys, are dwindle, right? It's absolutely insane for you to want to have this disparity, right? And to bring in workers like migrants, or is the best thing that can help this country if you want to remain having this type of market. But instead, you want to decrease the market, and let the rich consolidate the wealth, so that you don't cause, so that you don't afford migrants, which is just not unchristian, but it's just not good economic policy, right? Because why? Because many people would agree, right, that the deficit should not be decreased. It should be that we should just expand our markets and eclipse the deficit, right? To make more GDP per year. In order to have that, you have to have a bigger workforce. You have to have bigger paying taxes, and you have to have a larger market, right? But at the same time, experts would say that that they have, if they want to attack the deficit, then we have to find a way, and that way is not going to be to benefit just the top 10% of people that you don't even want them to pay taxes, right? That is not helping. That is not helping in any direction. It's not helping. This doesn't even make any sense. The only thing it helps is to ensure that they come out on top when everything hits the fan, right? And that is such a money grew. It's the fox, it's the fox. I also want to say that a lot of people that said that one of the people that God that God abhorred in a way, and brought to discipline, was those people that said about that when he came back, right? It was the when Jerusalem was destroyed, and the house of Judah was exiled, from Israel. When he came back, he went after the masters of the law, like before Christ, but also when Christ came, right? If you remember, the first people that went after Jesus and crucified him were the masters of the law, were the Pharisees, the teachers, and not even the Romans. It was the rabbis, right? And and if you realize in the Old Testament, when Jerusalem got destroyed, right, beforehand, that created the prophecy in Isaiah that led to the coming of Christ, right, being the king that restored the kingdom of heaven, right, which we Christians believe, right, that he was the king, and that the kingdom of heaven is spiritual, and then soon he will come back and he'll make it physical, right? Different things, right? So now when you look at the past, though, and you see what it was back then, when Jerusalem got destroyed in the first place, he went after the masters of the law. He went after these people, and he was mad at them for the reason being. because they had said that God was not present anymore, and that God had forgotten about them, and that God had abandoned them, and that God wasn't looking anymore, right? And that's the thing that I guess I want to say in this video is for you guys to remember that God is always watching. You know what I mean? Even when you think He's not. And the people that Jesus was mad at was those that were masters of the law and came by and they said that Jesus had abandoned them. Because the people are supposed to rely on the shepherd, and the shepherd had misguided them and had told them that God wasn't looking anymore and that all hope was lost, and that and this is what made the people alienate even further from God. And so when Jerusalem was destroyed, the reason being it was destroyed, as some people would say, is because people had forgotten about God, and people had delved into complete sin, right? And had delved into adultery, fornication, but worst, idolatry, which is worshiping a different God. When you look at the text, right, it says there's a mention of women in the temple in the Old Testament, right? Where there's women in the temple that were worshiping for their king to return, because obviously, right, the prophecy is that the king will return. They were crying for Jesus to return before he even returned, right? But they didn't know it was Jesus, right? Back then they didn't know who it was going to be. They just knew that they were waiting for the Messiah, for the return of the king. Well, people were worshiping for the return of a different king. They were worshiping for, they were waiting for Tammuz, right? Who happens to be a king that was reminiscent of Nimrod. You know what I mean? Just like yeah, he's gallant. He's this, charming, beautiful man, right? Who was strong and fit the perfect description of the perfect king. You know what I mean? And because he was a great hunter, he was a great warrior, and he was also, very beautiful for the women. You know what I mean? And very handsome. And so they were like, so there's a point in there where he starts where they start saying that God was witnessing these women outside the temple in Jerusalem, worshiping and calling out for Tammuz, crying out for Tammuz to return, right? And if you didn't know, our God is a jealous God, a very jealous God. You know what I mean? When he heard that the people were at the temple worshiping, calling for another God, and they had forgotten about God, they had fell away from God, they had forgotten, and they thought that he wasn't looking, and they thought that he wasn't coming back. Right? They not only lost it, did they lose faith, they were committing straight up idolatry. And there was and people were on the other side were sacrificing their babies to Baal, a different pagan god or Canaanite god. You know what I mean? They were they were doing all kinds of things, adultery, all kinds of things. Like the whole Jerusalem was, I mean, all of the whole city was corrupted. And in the very center, in the temple, it had gone to the point where they were even idolatry. They didn't even believe in God anymore. And that's when that was his last straw. That when he saw those women that were like it makes great mention about those women that were worshiping a different god during the time, right? Meaning they were totally lost. Like the whole people, all the people were lost. So what did he do? He called upon the men that were there in the temple and in the temple in the middle of the city, and he said, "Kill everybody that's in the temple. Kill all of them, right? Purge the temple from these idolaters, right?" And that's where the massacre started, and that's where they started. They started killing everybody from the temple out, from the most places from his temple, right? From God's temple, they started killing everybody. I mean, all those that were idolaters, all those that were wrong, right? So God ordered them to kill, and especially with those women that were worshiping, waiting for another god. I mean, because he's a jealous God after all. After he killed all of them, you know, he didn't stop there. The blood was running in the temple. You know what I mean? Rivers of blood. What? did he do next? He told him to go out to those guys that he had told him to go out to the city and to kill some more. He said go from the temple out to the city and kill those that are in the city as well. Every man, woman, and child. Right? And the what people don't understand about this text, and this is why I try to say this because I hear people say this all the time. People trying to say, oh, because people, I'm not a Christian nationalist. I'm a Catholic, right? And when people try to use this, I think a lot of kids, a lot of young people, they don't understand, right? Why they don't understand the nature of God. They don't understand how God could tell people how to do something like this, and why it's not viewed bad as people say, and especially nowadays when people want to call others evil, they would have called these people evil. But that's why I want to clarify, because right now, in this day and age, we're calling the state of Israel, right, called the Palestinians evil, and their Zionistic genocidal rhetoric that was spewed on the internet by people, by actors like Ben Shapiro, what I mean, led to the dehumanization of Palestinians, which was run by the media as painting them as some terroristic people, and condemning them evil, and condemning them. That led to the onslaught of year of bombing from Netanyahu, the prime minister of the state of Israel, led to 22,000 kids, innocent kids, murdered, right, by missiles and by Israeli forces, and plus 60,000 total deaths in counting, right? And let me tell you that there's nothing normal about that, or supporting that. Or ignoring that. There's good nothing that can justify that, right? And so people just heard, because they got desensitized, and they said, well, they're evil, so why should we care? And I've seen some of the most disgusting comments, online, that talk about, oh, they did it first or whatever. Let me just be clear. There's nothing normal about supporting that, right? There's nothing good about supporting that. And all you guys that want to say that God this and God that, God did not tell you to do that. Okay? There's nothing good. But let me tell you this. Let me say this though. um, the people that are in the state of Israel, they don't support Christianity. They are not Christians, and the Zionists are not Christian. Remember, those are the same guys that killed Jesus. You know what I mean? Those are the ones that killed Jesus. They are the original murderers of Jesus, right? And the original people that condemned them. Maybe not, they're not the Pharisees, but they are the people that did not become Christians. Okay, and just so you understand, right? And I see that even some Palestinian Christians were kicked out of Israel, even though they're Christians. You know what I mean? Because there are Palestinian Christians. And to say that there wasn't any Christians that were being bombed is preposterous. That's preposterous. Because 60,000 of them dead, all of Gaza destroyed. And again, at the hands of people who don't even believe in Christ. And they wish to tell us that God told them, no. I don't believe that. But let me clarify more. Same thing when people are trying to dehumanize the migrants, because they're trying to say that the migrants and El Salvadorian gangs are the same, that they're the same type of terrorists. Let me tell you, that is cap. That is cap. And no, and I know that y'all want to treat them the same as y'all would, if it was up to y'all would want to bomb them too. But that's not going to happen, right? Because you do not know, you are wrong in every sense that you call people evil. And I'm going to use that term just like you were calling those people. You would probably call those people that were ordered by God to slaughter everybody. You know what I mean? Man, woman, and child. You would call them evil too. But let me tell you what God really meant when he said that, and why you're wrong about calling Palestinian people evil, and why you're wrong about calling migrants or MS-13 evil, right? Okay. So, first of all, what is evil, right? When you look at what Jesus said, right? We're in a fallen state, correct? And if you're a Catholic, you believe that we got concupiscence, right? Which means that we have an inclination to sin, right? Does that make us evil? No, we're not inherently, we weren't made to be evil. We weren't inherently created to be evil, right? We have a fallen state. We have an inclination to commit sin, right? But we are not inherently evil. Our hearts are not evil. Every human being inherently wants to be good, right? It is our fallen state to commit sin. And and when you look at what Jesus says, right, from his words, he says that, there is no such. Why do you call, when his disciple went up to him and said, I want to be good like you, teacher? What did he say? What did Jesus say? Jesus said, why do thou call me good? Why do you call me good? Right? If I'm only doing what my father wants me to do, because there's only one good, and that's the Father, right? So there is no good man. Not even Jesus said, not even I'm not good. I'm just doing that what my Father tells me to do, because only my Father is good, right? That's what Jesus said out of his own words, which gives the meaning that we're not about vessels, and we were created in a certain way. But the only thing that the only original good is the Father, is God, the Creator, right? It is Jesus, and which now in spirit Jesus is also, there, right? Jesus is also God, but he said, right, he said as a human, he wasn't good he's a human. He was a human, and he was 100% human and 100% God. That doesn't make any sense, but it was true, right? He was pure human and pure God. But he said that he was not good. Only the Father is good, right? As to say that Jesus had a different function. He has a different use, or a different function, sort of, in the whole Godhead, right? And what he was doing was giving the glory to his Father, right? And the glory that the Father was doing was to out of love, to give his only Son as a sacrifice, right? And that's the love, right? And Jesus obeyed his Father, right? And so, and through this Holy Spirit, the love and everything that resonates from such a powerful, bond, unbreakable. I mean, this is just God, right? Of course, I believe in the Trinitarian God, the Trinity. So these are things this is the nature of God. Well, these are describing God, right? But when Jesus said, that he's only doing what the Father's telling him, that only the Father is good, right? He's making a fact to say that there's no such thing as good men, right? There's no such thing as good men. Nobody is good but the Father, and then Jesus, and those who listen to what Jesus says, right? And so people need to understand that, right? Because people like to call people evil, and there's no such thing. There's just a lack of good, right? And so, you know, okay. So moving on, when going back to the story, now that you understand that there's no such thing as evil, you have to understand that God told the people back in the day to slaughter every man, woman, and child, because God wasn't with them, and they were committing sin, right? They had forgotten about God, but moreover, they had forgotten about the next life after this one, right? So they had forgotten about the next life, and so they were living life trying to, block the sun with their thumb. They were sinning. They had forgotten about the condemnation. They had forgotten about the commandments. They had forgotten about God. They had forgotten about the punishment of sin. They had forgotten about, the kingdom of heaven or hell. They had forgotten about everything that God had told them, and they were idolatrous. They were worshiping other gods. So they were cooked. They were done. You know what I mean? There was no way to come back from that. For they were just like the whole lands were covered with sin, right? But then he says, I think, I'm not sure if it's in the same thing. Because when it comes to down to that, right? How did they get to that point? You know what I mean? Then you realize the reason why sin permeates the land, and he says that all the land was defiled, right? Why was the land defiled? Because the men on it had defiled it, and they had blasphemed against God, and they had done other things. For example, one of the things that they that blasphemes the land is hanging people from the trees and leaving them overnight. I mean, that blasphemes the land. That curses the land. You know what I mean? They're not supposed to let anybody, hang overnight. You know what I'm saying? And but again, the reason why was because the men that had put the laws had started, instead of worshiping God, had gone and pursued their own selfish desires, and they had made laws that were not for the people, not for God, but for themselves. And because of that, they had exalted themselves, and they had let injustice against the people. They had let corruption against the people, and in the highest forms of their government. They had allowed injustice to permeate throughout and perpetuate throughout the lands. And all the injustice and all the corruption had gone and reached its boiling point, its peaking point. It was all corrupted. It was like the system that I believe sometimes that needs to be thrown out because it's completely corrupted, right? That's what happened, right? And that's how people were living, but worse, because people were even, they had forgotten about God completely. They had forgotten about the commandments. They had forgotten about idolatry and idolatrous and all this stuff. It was like what we see, sinners now, but the people that he said that the people that were in charge were the ones that had caused this problem. The ones who were in charge were the ones that had gone away. They were the first ones to disobey God. The rest of the people just followed suit, because the main people in charge were the ones to blame, because they were the masters of the law, because they were the teachers, they were the rabbis, right? And they were the priests, and they are the ones that had said that God was not looking at them anymore. They're the ones that had misguided the people, and then they started making laws for themselves. That's what led the land to be defiled, right? So that's when he told them to go and kill every single person, because they had forgotten about God, and they had forgotten about the next life. So he was going to prove to them that God existed, right? And he was going to prove to the people that God existed by massacring them. Everyone who didn't have the cross, bear the mark of God, right? Everyone who didn't bear the mark of God, right? What those who had the mark of God would be spared. Those who didn't would be slaughtered, right? And that's what he did, right? Sound familiar? And that's what they did, because the whole land was cooked. The whole government was corrupted. The teachers had forgotten about God themselves. They had misguided the people. The people were lost, and they didn't know God anymore. They had forgotten, and they were sinning in idolatrous and doing all types of stuff. And there was no, and out to the point that it culminated to women idolatering. You know what I mean? If that's a word, idolatering. But they were worshiping a different God right in the most sacred temple of Yahweh, right? Right outside, right at the temple of Yahweh, they were worshiping a different God. It had culminated to the worst, to idolatry. And he's a jealous God, and he came and that's what he did. So, the argument that people use is, well, how could God, tell these people? Well, the people were suffering, right? How could God tell the people to commit acts against this, and whether they're evil or not? You know what I mean? The people were already, like, the kids were being slaughtered. They were being, they were being sacrificed to Baal, right? You know, everybody. I mean, you can imply that they were adulterous, that they were sinners, that they were idolatrous, that they were prostitutes, or that they were, engaged in all type of manner of sin, right? And maybe not as much as Gentiles, but as enough, because especially if they were God's people. And here's the beauty of it. because through the fact that these were the people that God had a covenant with, the Jewish people, also through their disobedience and through the slaughtering of them, we, everybody else, all other type of men would be saved, right? Because when you killed them, when they were disobeying, right, God was going to take judgment on them, and he was going to destroy them, right? The Jewish people, the house of Judah, and through them, through their disobedience and through the curse of them that God did against them, right? He was going to judge them, and he was going to judge everybody else based on that, right? And through their destruction of them, and through then that's the same thing that everybody else, because God is going to recompense. God doesn't regret choosing them, but he's going to do this anyway so that he can restore them one day. And when he restores them, it's going to be they're going to be again restored to be God's favorite people. But through their sacrifice, the rest of man is saved, right? And that's the beauty of it. That's very difficult to understand, right? And unless you really, you know, well, I mean, it's not that difficult to understand, but it's very difficult to understand why how this happens. For me, I look at it like this: it's like, well, God wanted these people to metamorphosize into what He wants them to be, right? And in order to do so, there has to be affliction. He has to make an example out of them, and through that example, right, the same thing happens in other nations until they become the same way, until they get assimilated, until they not assimilated, but until they become, because they don't have to get destroyed, they don't have to get slaughtered anymore, but we can learn through that how this happens, right? And the reason I say they don't have to be destroyed, because I say because Jesus tells us now, because we're, first of all, the Gentiles and everything, Christ came back, right? And he restored it. He restored it for all people. And God, when Christ came back, he judged the people from all the prophets that came before him, right? Up to that point. And he judged that generation for what had transpired. So yeah, he gave judgment on those things as well. And what did he say going forward? He said that we should love our neighbors, you know, and who are the neighbors? The good Samaritans, right? That he came for all men, right? And that Christ is for the Jewish just like the Gentiles. I mean, he comes and he says, you know, that's he's God for all the four winds. You know what I mean? That he is God, right? Just like those people, and they knew in the four winds when they were in the middle of Jerusalem and everybody was getting slaughtered, and the four winds, they knew that was God. That was God that was telling them to do this stuff. That was slaughtering everybody, right? They knew that, right? Now it's like, so yeah, so right, it goes to show that when you have people that are in charge of this government, which I can say is corrupted, right? At least its judicial system, because when you have migrants being called terrorists, but insurrectionists not being called terrorists, or you have, for example, Donald Trump is a rapist. This is not an opinion. This is a fact. He's also a president, right? And he's a rapist, but he's also, you know, I can't say that he's this other thing, and I can only say because he's been found in the court of law of being a rapist, right? He's been found guilty of it, not convicted of it, because it was found in the civil court, which means that basically he didn't. That it was like it was a civil court, right? It was like she was just stating the fact, and the fact turned out to be true, right? And they found him. They found it to be true. So I wasn't there, so I don't know, but God was there, right? God knows, and but what I will say is that when we live in a time where a rapist can be deemed, you know, completely competent, no problem, and even if he was friends with sex traffickers and child predators, even if he led an insurrection, even if he egregiously, allows the deaths of people, and he's a compulsive liar and just a merciless wannabe dictator, You know what I mean? That threatens, the world, and calling migrants terrorists, then that's a failure of just like that's a failure of many things. Moral compass, failure of the law, failure of many things. And again, so I want to say, what I mean, there's no such thing as evil men, and yet this is what they wish to call people. So I want y'all to implore yourselves and to understand that when somebody's calling somebody evil, they're not just only lying, but they're doing so in order for them to dehumanize and antagonize the people in which they want to do it to. And given the fact that this is the type of rhetoric that they put in the media, right before they started bombing the Palestinians, we can assume that this is what they want to plan to do, is they want to kill the people they call evil, right? Under the presumption that God is telling them to do it, right? But I don't believe that God is telling them to do it, because and so here's another nugget as to why I believe that there's no such thing as evil men, right? Um, I lived out here in the hood, right? I went to school, and I remember from when a young age, when I realized out that the world was different than what I thought, and that we were cooked. Basically, is when a cop told me that I was a gang member when I wasn't, and that I was selling drugs. I was like 14 years old, right? 13 years old, and he was harassing me and stuff. When I say this story, it's only white people that do not understand this story, and they say I'm lying. But black people that lived in the hood, they understand. They look at it and they're like, I know what you mean. But when you talk to black people, certain black people that hang around with white people that lived like white people, they don't understand either. But there is majority of people that understand, and then there's these people that don't understand because they want to say that I'm lying. But systemic racism is a real thing. You know what I mean? And their mate and in their politics, it doesn't exist. You know what I mean? So when when you know when this happened, right, I realized that it wasn't that the system was corrupt, right? It took me a while to realize that the whole system was corrupt. Now like I said, Trump is president. Yeah, it's cooked. It's the whole, like, there is no doubt in my mind that the whole thing is cooked from top to bottom, because I've seen it from the bottom and now I see it at the top. I mean, blatantly, right? The whole system, the whole government, the United States is cooked, right? So because at the lower level you had corrupted police that were liars, right, harassing you, and at the very top you got a rapist, fugitive, felon, convicted rapist, right, or convicted felon and a rapist and a child predator. I mean, insurrectionist, traitor. Right? I don't want to go into those tangents, but I mean, I could. There's not for this video, but I mean, the fact that people are still defending this corrupted system is what I don't get, right? Um, but that is the reality. And if somebody would have told me that when I was younger, then I wouldn't have probably found out the hard way, because I had to find out the hard way. I had to find out that I can't trust the police. I had to find out that nobody's gonna help me. I had to find out that I should have. Well, I mean, I don't regret how I found out, but I'm just saying that you know I would have been, I could have found out that I could have gone into politics a lot sooner and probably made it up towards the Washington White House steps by now. You know what I mean? Simply, but didn't think it was possible. But now I see that it is, right? Because this whole thing is cooked. I used to be under the impression that Americans that were predominantly Caucasian were somehow better than me, right? But that's not the case. It's just they have more money than me. And how Obama explained it the best, just the rich people, they think they're better than you because they're more exposed. They're like a girl who, look at, think about the girls that grew up with you. If you're a millennial, y'all were both 16, y'all went to school, right? And 17, you were cooler. And then when she got 18, y'all were like at the same level. And you realized that she liked older men. And you realized that, she wanted to go out everywhere. when she became 19 or 20, she was her value was skyrocketing, right? She was a superstar, right? And you realize that um wait, where am I trying to get at? Basically, um wait, what was I trying to I'm just trying to say that, that she goes out, anybody that goes out that goes out and travels more, I mean, they think they're exposed to more things, so they believe they're more sophisticated, they believe they're more cultured, I mean, because they've been exposed to more things. And that's just not like that doesn't mean they're better than you, right? There's nothing inherently in them that makes them better than you. They've just been exposed to more things, right? And it's just because she traveled everywhere that now she doesn't want to talk to you because, because she's cultured and you're just the same old guy that still stays in the same old city, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Whatever. You know what I mean? At the end of the day, that's exactly how rich white people think, and which where that's where I used to think, like, that's what they made me think, that they were better, and that I would never be able to go into the White House no matter how hard I tried. That was an impossible dream. Just like if I couldn't go to college. But that's I'm here to tell you that's a myth. That's a lie. You know what I mean? The only thing that's different between you and them, a lot of people are following these billionaires because they think that they can never be one. They think that these billionaires are, you know, better than them, and they're like, we won. What did you win? You didn't win nothing. You gave the billionaires your money. I mean, you gave them. You let the devil get away, right? All you did was you've gone feral, right? Voting for these billionaires and having them you because you think that they're smarter and better than you is sad. It's sad, right? Because I don't look at Elon Musk like, if I wouldn't, if he said something, I wouldn't care. Like, dude, whatever. You know what I mean? I don't care what you got to say. Like, yeah, I don't. You know what I'm saying? I don't praise you. I don't think you're better than everybody. I don't think you're better than me. You know what I mean? Right here, like, eye level with everybody. You're a human being. You can't fly. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about? And there's nothing special about him other than the fact that he's the world's richest man. you know, but but to say that I couldn't have been that is preposterous. I think it's a mixture of what you really want in life, and what I want people to believe, understand it also, is that you can do anything you want in life if you just put your mind to it. You know, Elon Musk wanted to be the richest man, so he spent all those hours working for it. Isaac Newton wanted to be the best physicist or whatever, the smartest man. He spent 18 hours a day doing that. You know what I mean? He didn't have a family. He didn't have whatever. You know what I mean? He didn't have kids. He didn't have a wife. No matter like what you do, Tesla, same thing. He wanted to find out the secrets of the universe. He did, and he didn't even share it with everybody. I mean, he had so many patents, right? People, whatever you want to do, you want to put your time into, then you will achieve that. But you have to fall and get back up and do it again and do it and be consistent and sacrifice for that time to do what it is that you want to do, right? And that's it. It's just simple physics. You can't be two places at one time. So you do that and you do what you want to do and you do, and that's what you put your time into, your effort, and so consistency, you will achieve it, right? You got to keep digging, right? Until you get the gold. Keep digging. You're almost there. Just keep going. Don't give up now. Just keep going. And sooner or later, you're gonna strike gold. You're gonna strike diamond. You're gonna get what you were putting your effort to it, right? So I want people to believe that. You know what I mean? Okay. So at the end of the day, you know, you know what? So when people call amateur teen evil, right? Understand that they're if they're not Christians. There's no Christian that's gonna call any other human being evil. If you hear somebody say that, they're more like Nazis or something. They're more like people that want to hurt other people. If somebody dehumanizes another human being and calls them evil, remember that's dehumanizing them. That is not a Christian thing. That don't let them fool you. They want blood and they want an excuse to harm these people that they're calling evil, right? I want you to understand that because that's proven in history, right? Just like that's proven in Palestine. They called them Palestinian evil, and then they blew them up. Do you know? Do you understand that? But look at the Palestinian people. 100 years war on Palestine, a history of settler colonialism and resistance. You know, can you humanize them? Because this doesn't look like the work of evil people. This looks like the work of people who were displaced and were colonized and then genocided. You understand what I'm saying? Don't let them fool you. Don't let Zionistic, genocidal rhetoric or rhetoric from the right or the Christian nationalists fool you. Okay, there is nothing good, there is nothing normal about supporting a genocide. There's nothing normal or good supporting 22,000 dead children. Okay, and there's nothing normal about supporting, dehumanizing migrants and supporting the incarceration of 2 and 4 and 10-year-olds. You know what I mean? Or any kid. There's nothing normal and there's nothing American about wanting to be a xenophobic racist. Okay, understand that, right? And there's nothing normal about giving all these tax cuts to the billionaire class at the expense to the top 10% at the expense of 90% of Americans. Right? There's nothing normal about that. Okay, so be careful. Um, what was I going to say? Yeah, so more evidence that Jesus says that when those people that were in Jerusalem, um, when God's so God ordered them to slaughter them, and here was you got. Oh, so I'm sorry. When I was here, right, when I was growing up, I realized that the cops were just as bad as the gangs and the people they're chasing. So I want you to understand one thing, about gangs in El Salvador too. Back then, the right, people like to say that the leftists and the communists and the Marxists are evil, but let me tell you what the right has done. The right has that I can just point out in history. 1900s, the right wingers, oligarchies took over El Salvador, and they killed the indigenous leaders that were fighting for their land that was being stripped away by the oligarchies. Because you have to understand that right wing capitalism has oppressed the indigenous people for so long. The indigenous people, I don't know if the indigenous people were leftists, but I'll tell you what, the right wing capitalists are the one that displaced them and genocided them and ethnically cleansed them. In El Salvador, 1900, the indigenous people were people like Feliciano Ama were hanged, they were assassinated, they were killed, and because they led a riot for their own land in which, and they were Catholic too, their own land in which they had fought they had been on there for centuries, for millennia, right? The original inhabitants, the indigenous, right? And they fought for that, and they got killed because of a right wing government who was being assimilated to Western culture, and was sponsored, as a colonialism. And this was after all the settlements. This was after colonialism. This was after the enslavement, the genocide, and the enslavement, and the those things, the slavery, right? Um, so then in 1940, right, the 1930s, there's this big massacre. That's where they ethnically cleansed the people language, the people who had a Nahua language, the another indigenous tribe from El Salvador. They called it the massacre. They killed tens and thousands of them in one field. You know what I mean? And that was the 1930s. And again, it was the right wing fascist people who did this, right? When you go and there was people that created a communist party, but the communist party was very small. It was just people, basically there were farmers, peasants who were fighting for democracy in order for them to take part of their own government, which was protected by the Constitution, but that was being suppressed by the fascist right wing leaders of the time, who wanted to enrich their oligarchies at the expense of the peasants, which is what, reminiscent of that slavery of these banana republics and colonialism and all that shit. You know what I mean? Which is again far right wing capitalism, which in Central America was just a complete exploitation of the people. Basically, it wasn't capitalism; it was just exploitation. You know what I mean? Almost slavery, almost legal slavery. right? And so that was in the 1930s where they killed many of these people again, and they done almost eradicated the indigenous people, and that's why the Nahua language is almost an extinct language because there's only less than 2,000 members of the Nahua people still alive. You know what I mean? And then when you look even further, you realize in the 1970s, right? When there was people, there was of course there was uprising. There were still people that were fighting for democracy, and there were still people that were communist. I mean, fascist or right winger. And you realize that the what happened when America puts the again in El Salvador putting their right wing influence all across the region. They wanted the El Salvadorians to fight a proxy war. So what they did to get rid of leftists, because at the time of the Cold War, so what they did was they got even though Salvadorians had a democracy and they were a Christian nation, or they were believers, they were Catholics, they had Christians, they had Catholics. They believed in God, and they had a constitution. They had a democratically elected president and a democratic process, and yet, that was two left. Even though they believed in God, even though it was left, you see, you have to realize that capitalism is not compatible with what God says, and you have to understand that God tells people to live sort of like in a commune, what I mean, sort of like communism, but not and in terms of the people, right? And that's one of the things that people don't want to admit is that they give up God's word for capitalism. But capitalism was not something that was created, at the beginning of time. It's been around. No, it was something that was introduced to us, right? And it's not going to be here forever neither. You know what I mean? And it has an end date. You know what I mean? And so it has caused the lives of millions of people as well. You have to understand this, right? And at the same time, like I said, these far right wing governments pressured, even El Salvador back in the 1970s to have a proxy war. So what they did was, at the threat of leftist guerrillas who were just peasants now armed, what I mean, unlike before, now they were armed and they wanted to have a revolution for their freedom and for them to be able to plant on their own lands and, be able to sell their own crops. You know what I mean? Because they needed to sell to have, they were starving, and the oligarchies again were trying to take over the lands again, like always. So every time the Republicans come and they want to, they want to suppress the leftists, they end up killing innocent people. But this time they had a revolution. They were fighting back. So they had guns. This time they had guns. So what happened was they were labeled, guerrilla fighters. They try to put a narrative here in the U.S. that there was a long history about that too, about the CIA trying to terrorize its own citizens here in the U.S. and then blame it on Latin American countries in order for them to justify an invasion in Cuba, for example, against Fidel Castro's lawless regime or whatever that the Americans were so petrified at but they didn't know that they were being that the American citizens in the media had them sipping the Kool-Aid, brainwashed and stuff, and then thinking that just like right now, thinking that every migrant is a terrorist or whatever. You know what I mean? The same thing. You've been brainwashed. You know what I mean? And I'm sick of freaking saying it because I've said it so many times. I've said it since I was 16 years old that the people here do not have any understanding of what happens in El Salvador for them to be judging the people there. You know what I mean? They don't have any understanding or care about anybody outside of the U.S. for them to be trying to, justify an invasion anywhere. What they are doing is allowing their government to commit crimes against humanity all across the world while trying to, while exporting the same nations, extorting the same nations, and oppressing everywhere. It's just disgusting. And for them to call themselves a Christian nation or whatever, while they're allowing their corrupt government to just harm people everywhere. I'm telling you because I am an American, and Americans need to be participating in their government, right? So that these things don't happen, right? That's why we have that's why we share an interest in our government, in this government, because we didn't have this freedom. Because Americans, though they had this freedom here, they didn't allow this freedom in other countries, right? Like I said, they sponsored the military government of El Salvador to suppress the democracy in their country, and so they elected a puppet democracy or whatever, an oligarchy, and they were trying to take the lands once again. And the peasants rose up once again and said, "No, we don't want you to take it," because all they do is just It's just the rich people enriching themselves. It's the same old, capitalists enriching themselves at the expense of the people, right? And so, and the people that end up paying the price is the regular people. So look, MAGA, when they start bitching again, they're the ones that allowed the rich to get $9 trillion and out that tax cuts, tax cuts alone in the last 10 years, while at the expense of all the services of the rest of us. I mean, of them as included. You know what I mean? And it's like later they're gonna be bitching about, oh, what happened? I mean, what the fuck, and then they're gonna be blaming the Democrats because the same people that robbed them are gonna tell them it was the Democrats' fault. You know what I mean? It's just I'm sick of this because this is what's been going on for the last 20 years. This was like the Republicans have done this for the last 20 years, and I mean. And I'm not gonna lie, bro. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not gonna say that the Democrats are 100% perfect, but I'm not gonna say that I'm not just gonna ignore. But they're better than the Republicans. They're way better than the Republicans, right? The Republicans have launched a war. First of all, on their watch, 9/11 happened. They launched a war, and then they passed that on to Obama. Obama fixed it and gave us jobs. But then they crashed the market during Obama's thing. And, again, right wing capitalists, mainly Republicans, Fox News and Wall Street, crashed the market. They stole the quantitative easing, and then they blamed Obama for it or whatever. Then they bring in Trump. Trump gives them a tax cut. They make $9 million. They go through a pandemic. 500,000 Americans dead because they didn't have health care, and the health care services weren't there quick enough to give them COVID vaccines and everything. Again, because that was cut because they needed to pay for the free lunch for the rich billionaires' free lunch. You know what I mean, for the tax cuts at the expense of the people. 500,000 Americans dead. Then they blame Biden. Then they get mad when then they give that over to Biden. Biden comes in and puts programs that Trump never fucking cared about these people and starts putting programs to help all the people. He saves the people, right? And he even has to go and save the countries that Trump alienated us from, thus saving people all across the world. And then having helped them, now we can cooperate and start our market again. And then Trump comes over here and fucks up everything again. You're just being pushed and pulled and tugged and but you know what? Pushed and pulled in a way that the fucking billionaires made $9 trillion. Because that's all they do is capitalize off of crises. So while the Democrats have put programs to help the people, they help, and then the Republicans come and they say, no, give me that too. Stop that. But they're making money, simultaneously their own way. But they don't want the money to go to the people. They want the money to go to themselves. They don't have no problem with giving the tax cuts, but they got a problem with helping the people from dying. You know what I mean? And that's just how that's just I'm so sick of this because they blamed Obama for the war, right? Or they blamed Biden for the war when it's like that war was started by the Republicans. I mean, the Republicans are the ones that wanted to march into Afghanistan and do all shit, right? They're the ones that made money off of freaking weapon contract deals, right? Not, you know what I mean? And all this stuff. Like I said, I'm sick of them blaming the Democrats. The Democrats might be bad, but they're not as bad as the Republicans. Okay, they're not as bad as the Republicans. This is what they're gonna tell you. They don't care about you. They only care about making money, right? And then virtue signaling, and then trying to keep America white. And so they're willing to kill all of you, if you keep letting them make money, and then replace you with people that are brainwashed, to let them be kings over them. Y'all want to be peasants? I mean, that's crazy, man. That's crazy. That white people rather be peasants instead of coexisting and helping the black and the brown man, help the chains off of us, after 400, 500 years of enslavement and capitalism and exploitation. You know what I mean? But anyway, and then they call themselves Christians. Yeah, whatever. Like if they weren't doing all this for money the whole entire time, I mean, that's not what they were caring about this entire 500 years. You know what I mean? What was I going to say? It's not. Look at when you see a third world country, and you see that they're human beings and they're suffering, and you think that we shouldn't help them, and you're an American and you live in the world's greatest place, and you think we should help them, then dude, you're not a Christian, and you don't understand God. You don't understand love. You don't understand making the world a better place. Now imagine that's the third world country. And imagine these people, they can't even look at their own fellow citizens and want to help them. You know what I mean? They think that it's a waste of money to help them. You know, that is just so wrong, man. Just so wrong, you know? And I, it's very trying because it's because I live here, and this materialistic, those type of influences lead you to hell. I mean, so anyway, so yeah, so again, the people are not evil. So I learned that the cops and the people, the gangsters are both, are the same in the sense that they're both violent. So when God was telling these people to kill these other people, you have to understand that both men were violent, except one of them was killing in the name of God, right? Because God said so. God ordered them to. So when you look at gangs, there's another thing I want to say that God says for us to only be afraid of no mortal man, but the only one we should fear is the man who has the power to send us to hell, right? And that can not only kill your body, but can also send you to hell after you die, right? Or can send your spirit to hell after you die. So what does that mean? It means that death is not the worst thing ever, right? But God is the only one who you should fear. And when you look at Republicans, they vote because they're scared. You know what I mean? Why are they scared? I thought they were Christians. I mean, if they were Christians, they wouldn't be scared of migrants. If they were Christians, they wouldn't be scared of, call them terrorists and be scared of every migrant. And by the way, if there's a few bad actors that come over, right? Should you condemn all of them for that? No, right? There's no excuse as to why you're putting 2 or 4 year olds in front of a court. There's no justification. I mean, you are wrong, and that kind of xenophobia is what leads to innocent people dying, right? So I have never seen so much blatant racism, like I said, But I am 100% convinced this whole system is cooked from the bottom all the way to the top. I've seen it from police officers, but to hear it from millions of people in the nation to realize this is what they are, racist. You know what I mean? And seeing that's why they voted for Trump, that is disgusting. It is despicable. It is not American. It is not Christian. It is just the worst. This is worse. This is beyond racism. Understand? This is biblical. I think. You know what I mean? And it's like they're lost souls. You know what I mean? So I would warn you to not listen to them. Do not listen to any kind of MAGA trying to justify these things. You know, try to help them see the light, but don't think for a second that any of this is justified. That somehow putting kids in cages or migrants is justified. Calling them terrorists is justified, or condemning innocent people is justified, or supporting a genocide is justified. Don't don't let people tell you that somehow God told him Trump to do that. You know what I mean? Or that God, whatever. No, don't even mention them in the same sense. Um, it's just ridiculous. But yeah, what I mean. Um, so the point being that men are violent. MS-13. They made a SACOT for them, but they didn't have no SACOT for the military government that was slaughtering people in the 1980s or in the 1930s or in the 1900s, right? They didn't make no SACOT for these right wingers. It's the equivalent of the Proud Boys escaping without even without getting, even though they had a conspiracy to overthrow the government, and they're seditionists and they're actors, insurrectionists, terrorists, domestic terrorists, and yet they don't get called that. That's the same thing. The military government, paramilitary death squads in El Salvador were trained by Israeli forces at the behest of the Americans, and then the Americans, paid $1 million a day for them to kill all sort of guerrillas, and the guerrillas who were just peasants and poor people and indigenous people, the poorest people who lived in the same areas as the guerrillas, got got clapped. They massacred people at the behest of Americans. And the right wingers, the fascists, the right wing paramilitary death squads, That's what I'm telling you. There was no SACOP for them. They weren't called terrorists because they did it because the Americans said so. So understand that the narrative that America says is not necessarily true. It's a narrative, and the reason why they brainwash you is because if you were to, because they wouldn't be able to do it unless you thought that these people were evil, right? But the real reality is because they want their politics to rule because they enrich themselves with right wing fascism. They're enriching themselves, you know, and they're lying to the public, right? And that's what they do. And they kill innocent people in order for them that resist them in order for them to enrich themselves, right? It's not, you know what I'm saying, you know, for real, seriously. That's the only reason that Trump is not in jail or, 6 feet deep or in the bottom of the ocean because people allowed him to be a rapist. They allowed him to be a child predator. They allowed him to be a horrible leader. The world they deemed him the world's dangerous man at one point. Okay, he helped Putin, cyber attack and hack the election. He dismantled the government. He led an insurrection, zero proof. He he's just a liar, man, and he let 500,000 Americans die during the pandemic. He lied to the people. He's the worst. He's the worst, and they let him because that's why because people are brainwashed, and so that's why they let him do it. And if people weren't brainwashed, and if there wasn't money involved, then he wouldn't be able to get away with this shit. But he's getting away with it right so far, But he's not, because of the fact that people are brainwashed. You know what I mean? And you know, and that's the only reason. Because how can you? I mean, he's a rapist. He was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. He sexualized girls. You know what I mean? He's a child predator, and I hate to say that, but that's true. I wish I was lying. I mean, but it's just the reality of where we live at. Where we're like, and so how can you? He's disgraced the Oval Office, right? He's not even close to righteous to be even in the Oval Office, much less a man of God that can give me a sermon. You know what I mean, or anything. You know what I mean? Are you kidding me? The standard is so low. You know what I mean? The standard is so low. Um, it sucks to see that because you have to bring the standard so low for these racist people to feel like they're competent. It's pathetic. You know what I mean? It's absolutely pathetic. And then y'all want to endanger innocent people just at the behest of these racist lowlifes, MAGA. You know what I mean? Losers. Anyway, just because they're upset at the world, just because they're losers and they're upset at the world. You know what I mean? And because they don't want because they want handouts. They call Biden they call Biden daddy. They say, oh, you're not gonna get your daddy anymore. Biden, because because all the things that he helped the American people while Trump let you out to die. You know what I mean? And didn't help the people at all. You know what I mean? This is sick. This is sick. But at the same time, they're the ones that are bitching about the handouts because they want the handouts. You know what I mean? They're mad that they ain't getting the handouts. You know what I mean? Shit. They mad that we help with some other people that's not them. They just mad. They just want to be in the front of the line. You know what I mean? That's all. It's not like they don't want the handouts. It's not like that. Like they don't call Trump their daddy because Trump is supposedly going to get them their shit, right? So it's like they're the ones that motherfucking. And so who's the real big baby here? And besides, they want to say that liberal tears. Who's the one that led an insurrection and shit? Who's the one that were bitching for 4 years? And who's the one that voted for a rapist even though they know he's a rapist? You know what I mean? Who's the one that neglects reality, that wants to be delusional? You know what I mean? And just rejects facts and shit. No, you're the ones with the temper tantrum. You're the ones that are immature. You're the ones that allow a sexual predator, child molester, convicted felon, and a rapist to fucking tell you what to think. I mean, fuck that. You know what I mean? And tell your kids what to think. Get out of here. I mean, it's just there's just certain lines that I there's just certain people that I would never look up to, and an insurrectionist is one of them. You know what I mean? Especially when he lets a globalist, a billionaire white dude who's a rapist and got away with being a child predator all his life. You know what I mean? And all that stuff is not one of them. You know what I mean? Straight up. So anyway, that's all I got. That's all I got to say. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day. So in conclusion, there's no, I laugh at people like Trump, but not even Trump is evil, but he has committed sin, and you know what I mean. Neither is MS-13 evil. Um, but if MS-13 wasn't MS-13, remember, even if they're being treated better than indigenous people were treated hundreds of years ago. Not that we should treat them worse, but I'm just saying that historically speaking, they treated indigenous people worse. They've treated unarmed leftists worse. They've treated Jesuit people and Christians worse than what um, um, than what they're treating MS or what they're treating Salvadorian migrants now. But they're still treating them bad. It's still unconscionable. But I'm just trying to tell you that luckily now we have cameras, and that's why the only reason. But you have to understand that Salvador, like people like MS, they're not used to people caring about them. You know what I mean? And that is part of the problem as to why they exist, because nobody cared about them, right? And just like the people that join gangs now, right? And even here in the U.S., people don't care about them. That's why they join gangs, because they don't have the love, they don't have no other option, and they are filled with wanting to preserve their dignity or something that happens, something personal. Many things can be that, but if people showed more love and people cared about, and there was opportunities, and there wasn't like a history of the military slaughtering, them, then there wouldn't be MS, and they wouldn't be getting called terrorists now. You know what I mean? The CIA helped create the cartel, right? What America should have been doing is sending aid, for hundreds of years, and helping for 100 years, or the last 150 years, dozen years, to help El Salvador, right? If I mean, and help other countries too. I'm just saying, like, what I mean, that SACOT is not an answer to a symptom. And the symptom is like I said, in the 1980s, the military government killed many, many more people. There was no SACOT. If you realize, when was the last time that Proud Boys, right wingers, or fascists get locked up? They become these big old fucking bullshit. Yet you have never seen communists, right? You have never seen real talk. You have never seen communists or socialists on this side of the hemisphere, right? And again, because of capitalism, only enrich a few rich people who control the whole narrative. So just letting you know, because people that call other people evil, they're lying. You know what I mean? People are not evil, but we are sinners.